Hello and welcome to TheAIbumMan. Today we're going to be talking about 5 albums which really disappointed me in 2017. Now 2017 had so many wonderful releases, but these albums, these were the ones that were either just plain terrible or albums which really I expected to be a lot better. The first album we're going to be talking about is Villains by Queens of the Stone Age. I was very surprised when I saw that Classic Rock magazine gave their album of the year to Villains by Queens of the Stone Age. As you can see by its inclusion in this video, this is not an album that I like, and I find some of the critical buzz that surrounded this album to be, well, rather surprising, if anything. To me, this album, this is Queens with a pop sheen. Probably courtesy of the producer Mark Ronson, who's best known for working with Bruno Mars, Uptown Funk, that type of thing. And I think that polish, that sheen, that pop refinement really rubs off on Queens of the Stone Age on this record. Here we have uninspired, bland pop rock songs with little hook nor substance to them. And this is coming off the back of Like Clockwork. Like Clockwork was an absolute masterstroke of an album that was ambitious in its approach, its multifaceted song structures, instrumentation, gorgeous melodies, and powerful riffs. You had songs like God of the Sun and I Appear Missing. And here we just have fuzz-laden pop music. I mean, while songs like Domesticated Animals perhaps have elements of that Like Clockwork sound that was so good, and Villains of Circumstances is a pretty good song. Things like The Way You Used to Do, Hideaway, The Evil Has Landed, just commit one of the worst crimes that you can possibly commit in music, being tediously dull. Just dull as dishwater. The problem is the same kind of fuzzy, almost recycled riffs that you can barely distinguish one from the other seem to permeate the songs with little to no dynamic variation. And I guess the problem is that, like Clockwork, that was daring, it was bold in what it wanted to achieve. Villains, it's harmless, it's inoffensive, and it just feels like a regress. It's not as bad as Era Vulgaris, which is, I find, almost unlistenable. It's a pretty bad album. But unless you want over-polished, soulless rock music, then I don't think this is going to be your cup of tea.
I write songs and fight and I fuck too. If you wanna fight, then I'll fight you.
So now that I've received a lot of hate for including Queens of the Stone Age in my most disappointing list, remember, this is just my opinion. Let's include another titan of music who people can hate on me for. This is Heaven Upside Down by Marilyn Manson. If I had to describe this, my thoughts on this album in one phrase, it would just be too edgy for me. Look, I thought that Pale Emperor, that was a pretty damn good album. Manson seemed like he had matured. But here, he pretends like it's the late 90s again and Antichrist Superstar is relevant. He's in his 20s and all of that, but instead we find an album which, I mean, this is a very personal preference, is far too industrial for my taste. I've never been as big into the real industrial side of Manson. Hollywood is my favourite album, and what does have that industrial flair to it, I'd say it's more of just a good commercial metal album with some interesting lyricism and themes and great vocals on it. And the lyrics, I mean, that was one of the things that disappointed me the most with this. I thought that Trump would have riled Marilyn Manson's feathers and he would have found his political edge. You know, like Marillion found their political edge with Fear, I thought Marilyn Manson would have found his. But instead, we have such brilliant lyrics, like, to quote from Jesus Crisis, I write songs to fight and to fuck to. If you want to fight, then I'll fight you. If you want to fuck, I will fuck you. Dear me. And that song is particularly obnoxious with, I don't know, some kind of blaring house music vocal, prodigy vocals? I don't even know. There's something weird going on. And it just feels like 90s nostalgia done rather badly. I was underwhelmed by this one. during my first take of this video, I actually completely forgot to mention the album we're going to be talking about now. Infinite by Deep Purple. So why is this on here? A Deep Purple record? Well, I really enjoyed Now What back in 2013, but Infinite really did not do it for me, and that's not to say it's a bad album. This is a list of disappointments, and this is simply a disappointment. To me, this is a very average album. It's rather cliche, unoriginal, and just a bit disappointing from the masters of hard rock. Now What was, well, maybe not the most original album ever, had some well put together songs. But here, everything aside from Don Airey's keyboard work doesn't really stand out. Even Steve Morse's guitar work is underwhelming here, and I do rate him very highly. I love him in the supergroup Flying Colours, for example. And even just some of the tracks they choose to play, such as their cover of Roadhouse Blues. Do we really need another cover in rock music of Roadhouse Blues? It has been done to death. It's been done a million times. It's been done amazingly by so many artists, and I don't really feel they add anything to it. And Gillan's voice sounds fine, and I guess that's just the thing. Everything here just sounds fine, but it just plods along, going through the motions. It feels like it's been released just for the sake of releasing something. An album with little substance, an album with little to actually say. It's just a release because, well, we need something to tour on, and Infinite, you know, why not? But if only this album was as interesting as Ian Gillan's bizarre views on physics and metaphysics, which I highly recommend looking up on the internet because they are rather strange indeed. Next up, we have something a little different. This is Planetarium by Sufjan Stevens. I fell in love with Sufjan back in 2015 with the release of Carry and Low, and I love most of his back catalogue as well now. I even listen to the Christmas songs at Christmas. He's just such a wonderful singer-songwriter with innovative, boundary-pushing, emotionally deep music. And here he's collaborating with some guy from the band The National and a classical composer on a concept album about planets. And let's just say that Planetarium ain't exactly hosts the planets. This isn't a terrible album in terms of execution, but I just really, really hate it. Quite deeply, in fact. I mean, I can deal with some electro kind of skitters in Sufjan's music, but this level of boring, obnoxious electro combined with, and I hate to say it, the worst element of all, his voice. I honestly never thought I'd be lobbing that as a criticism against a Sufjan Stevens record. I mean, his voice is divine, the voice of the gods, but here it's just saturated in vocal effects, artificial, mechanical, and it's almost unrecognisable. I find that all the emotion he's trying to convey is just instantly dehumanised and devaluated by the effects placed on his voice, as typified with songs like Saturn and Earth. And vocal effects can work, and Sufjan has certainly, you know, never been a stranger to vocal effects, let's put it that way. But here, I'm just not sure it really thematically fits with the rest of the album. I mean, there are places where his voice has no effects on it, like Moon, but I mean, I find the instrumental parts of that type of thing just a bit too electro for my taste. So Pluto is a pretty good song, and that's more of an example of where Sufjan's voice, the classical contribution, and the electro all really come together in one nice package. A lot of the time they seem to be kind of disparate entities competing for the same space, but never really finding that balance, that yin and yang. That veil of night, and you're too numb to realize. Last, and I mean, I wouldn't say least, but I mean, it's on this list, so it's clearly not great. We have Black Laden Crown by Danzig. Why is this album here? This album's received, you know, generally okay reviews. Some people have called this Danzig's best album in decades, the best thing he's done since Danzig 3. The thing about that claim is, have they really listened to the production? I mean, I grant there's people who they don't care about production. They can, and you know, good for you if you're one of those people. And certainly on my early first wave Norwegian black metal, yeah, I can cope with some shitty production. It kind of fits the sound. Here though, this album has the worst production of the year. This is Frequency Unknown by Queensryche level of terrible mixing at the end of the day. It's really a mixing problem here. Why? Danzig's vocals are so loud. They're so high in the mix. They drown out just about everything else, every other instrument. They are obnoxiously loud. And I mean, Danzig's getting on a bit. His voice, well, actually not that bad on this album. It's not as strong as it used to be. But here, because it's so loud, you can really hear the vocal faults in his voice. He just doesn't have that power he wants to, and that's fair. You know, he's older, he's aged, and I can respect that. But then don't turn the voice loud. So of course... So of course the first thing I did after listening to this album was look up, you know, who is the producer, who is the mixer responsible for this mess. And you want to know who it is? Mr. Glenn Danzig himself produced the album, and he put his voice at the highest point in the mix. Well done, Danzig. Well, some of the riffs and solos, I'll grant, are decent. This album, even instrumentally, just kind of slowly limps along before just falling apart every time we hear Danzig's sonic boom of a voice blare out of the microphone. It just has such a demo vibe about it. I mean, that's the thing. It sounds like a demo. In the same way that I found that Meatloaf's Braver Than We Are, Meatloaf's vocals have that kind of demo-like nature to them. Danzig certainly do here. And there's one thing having that kind of rough around the edges recorded in, you know, one take, you know, vibe, like you get on, say, you know, Dylan's most recent albums, his exploration to Frank Sinatra's. Most of those songs are just done in one take, or Rolling Stones' Blue and Lonesome. You know, they've got some roughness in their production, they're not clean and polished. I like that. That adds that kind of that live feeling. But here, you know, Mick Jagger, but I mean, with them, Mick Jagger and Dylan's voice are still mixed nicely. Yeah, Danzig's is not, and that's why it makes it onto the list. So these have been my 5 most disappointing albums of the year. I'd love to know what were some of the albums that disappointed you throughout the year, and I would also like to know how viciously you disagree with me. Let's try and keep it civil though. This has been TheAIbumMan. Thanks for watching. Tune in for more lists coming over the next couple of weeks to really wrap up the end of the year, and as usual, long live rock and roll.